Order. I call Rebecca Long-Bailey to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Vickers. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning. British nuclear test veterans have now rightfully received medallic recognition for their service, and for that I'm very grateful to the government. But the Minister must know that behind their proud smiles, veterans are really struggling. These veterans and sometimes their wives, widows and descendants have reported making repeated requests to gain access to their blood or urine testing sample results, and the veterans recall these being taken during the nuclear testing programme. Sadly, many confirm that their service medical records frequently do not include the test results, and they just don't understand why. For many veterans and descendants, this is relevant to their current health concerns and the treatment that they may need, from anemia to leukemia to rare genetic conditions, which is why it's so important for them to access this information urgently. Now, as the Minister will know, nuclear testing veterans first raised the issue of health problems in 1983. The then Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, ordered a health study by the National Radiological Protection Board in 1985, which in 1988 reported that there was a slight risk of veterans getting leukemia. This report was only 7 pages long, and it was criticised by veterans as a whitewash. It was repeated with similar results in 1993 and in 2003. Further, in recent days, it's been reported that this 1988 scientific report was also altered on the instruction of officials. Now, the link between radiation and illness is, of course, now well established. In 2007, genetic research found nuclear veterans had the same rate of DNA damage as clean-up workers at Chernobyl. In 2011, an MOD health study found that 83% of survivors had 1 to 9 chronic health conditions. And further surveys of nuclear veterans report miscarriage rates are 3 times higher in wives, and children have 10 times the usual number of birth defects. However, despite the clear health risks and the apparent causal links to the conditions experienced by many nuclear testing veterans, very few war pensions are approved, unless a veteran can clearly show information proving risk and impact on health. Now, such information would, for example, be blood and urine samples demonstrating high levels of radiation exposure, but information from successive defence ministers or potential record holders has been inconsistent and unclear on whether there were tests, whether records were kept, where they were kept, and whether records are now accessible for searching.
Will the Honourable Member give way?
I will.
I thank the Honourable Member, and in particular congratulate her for securing this debate and for all of her very successful campaigning work on this issue. I have a constituent whose late husband was one of those test veterans who served in Kiritimati or Christmas Island. And she wrote to me just a couple of months ago, on landing back home after an arduous journey, at the young age of 20 or 21 years old, he started to regress into bedwetting. None of the politicians that are now in this House could possibly, she writes, could possibly know what it was like to be ordered to be guinea pigs for the so-called good of the country. So given what my constituent writes, does the Honourable Member agree that some of the illnesses and symptoms were mental as well as physical?
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
I thank my honourable colleague for his intervention, and I agree with the comments that he's made, and also that it's not just physical conditions that impacted these veterans. It was indeed profound mental health concerns that were reported afterwards as a result of what they experienced. And my constituent's granddad, John Morris, is just one nuclear testing veteran who has suffered, and one who has been trying to locate this information so that he can apply for a war pension. He himself was a Royal Engineer and served at Operation Grapple on Christmas Island, and he witnessed 4 nuclear explosions. He told me that one day he and his colleagues were told to sit in the open air with their backs to the explosion. Shorts and shirts were the norm, but on this day they were told to wear army-issued sunglasses and to find a cloth to put over their eyes. They were then hit with a flash 1,000 times brighter than the sun. His hands became an X-ray as he could see every bone and every joint, and he was then hit with the heat blast. It was so intense that the palm trees scorched, as did the men's backs. On his return from service, John's firstborn son tragically died suddenly at 4 months old due to birth defects John believes were linked to radiation. John himself has since been diagnosed with cancer and at age 26 developed pernicious anemia, a blood disorder linked to radiation. John gave multiple blood samples during his service, but they cannot be found on his main medical records. When he asked for details of the blood tests, he was told, "Everything you have received was all that was held in your army personnel and medical file." And John's story is matched by countless similar battles for test and medical information from other nuclear veterans. So my first simple question to the Minister is, were blood and urine samples taken from nuclear testing veterans, and was a record kept of those samples? And to help in his analysis, I'll share with him the information which I'm aware has been archived on this basis so far. Firstly, there are publicly available documents. Limited documents, notes, forms, official instructions and guidance that are accessible in the National Archives, and they highlight a range of pertinent references that suggest that blood and urine test data was collected from servicemen and that this information was stored and analysed. For example, documents show that the MOD had a Director of Hygiene and Research who organised blood tests and kept blood tests of personnel and kept a master record of results. They know orders from the Air Ministry and War Office telling unit medical officers to arrange repeated blood testing of personnel working regularly with radioactive sources. They detail the medical forms used and the instructions on how to duplicate and store them. They point to Army blood tests being copied from AWRE records to be put in soldiers' main medical files. They show that pathologists attached to the weapons trials were told to create a special health register to log the data. And there are countless other documents ordering the testing of servicemen at various nuclear trials. So it seems clear that blood and urine tests were routine and that they existed as formal documentation, and indeed there was a register and master record kept. Yet to my knowledge, the registers and master records have not been released, nor has specific documentation relating to each individual, bar 1 or 2 exceptions. It should also be noted that thousands of the released documents relating to this period reference the AB and ES series of files. And I understand that these were withdrawn from the National Archives for a security review in 2018 with no expected date of return. Secondly, the Minister will be aware of a Freedom of Information request made to the Atomic Weapons Establishment, the AWE, in September, which uncovered a list of 150 documents currently held by the AWE. 3 are in the public domain, but the remainder are not. And these documents include titles such as blood examinations, personnel proceeding to Christmas Island, message from AWRE Christmas Island to AWRE Aldermaston referencing blood count irregularities from, and the name is redacted, blood counts at Maralinga, dose records, Grapple Z, record of 4 urine samples, and there are many more documents like this referred to of a similar vein. So again, these documents seem to very clearly point to the existence of blood and urine test results. And now the Minister may of course be as perplexed as I am as to the location of such sample results and why they've not been released to veterans. Indeed, the government responses to such questions over the last few years have certainly sown a great deal of confusion. For example, in 2018, it was stated that the MOD is unable to locate any information that suggests that the Atomic Weapons Research Establishment staff took blood samples for radiological monitoring at the tests. Then in November last year, it was stated the AWE does hold copies of the results of urine radioactivity measurements and blood tests for a small number of individuals where these were included in scientific documentation on the nuclear weapons trials. Then in December last year, the opposite was again indicated. We would also like to take this opportunity to confirm that the AWE does not hold the medical records or the results of blood and urine tests for current or ex-servicemen. And this merry-go-round of confusion goes round and round, month after month, in every question asked and in every response received.
The Honourable Lady Hidway.
Yes.
I thank the Honourable Lady and congratulate her on securing this debate, which is of particular interest to my constituent Steve Pearce, whose late father served at Maralinga. Now, Steve and his young son have rare genetic conditions, and he's described the distress that he experiences over uncertainty as to the medical records of his late father and whether or not those can be disclosed. So would she agree that the primary outcome of this debate needs to be greater certainty for people like Steve as to what the answer to that question is?
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you. I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and I know his constituent very well. He's a very lovely man and has fought long and hard to receive recognition for veterans and their families and descendants. And unfortunately, veterans themselves haven't undergone an extensive health study into the effects of radiation that they were exposed to, let alone descendants and the impact on future family members. And that's something that the government certainly needs to address, to give people like Steve the certainty that he will receive the support that he requires if it's needed in the future. And at the moment, he isn't receiving such support, sadly. Now, I know the Minister himself has stated that it's likely that the blood tests are simply categorised in scientific data at the AWE. And that may, of course, be the case. But for that data to even exist in the first place, the sample results had to come first. So what happened to them? Now, I truly intend to be helpful to the Minister in getting to the bottom of this puzzle. I've no doubt that he wants to help veterans and their families receive the information that they need. And to that end, I have a number of questions that I'd like him to answer. Firstly, can the Minister review the security classification for the 150 FOI documents I've mentioned so that they can be released for public view? Will he release the A, B and ES series of files, and if not, explain to the House why they are to be withheld? In response to a recent question to the Defence Secretary, I was informed that all classified documents that have been retained by the Ministry of Defence under a Lord Chancellor's instruction or a national security exemption are still available to be searched on request. So if indeed they are searchable, despite being withheld documents, can the Minister confirm that the person making the relevant search request would be notified that that information is being withheld and given the reasons why? Is the Minister specifically aware of any blood test and urine sample information that is being withheld under a Lord Chancellor's instruction or national security exemption? He'll also be aware that many blood tests and urine tests were actually taken under old Air Ministry orders, and that the AWRE weren't legally required to share or disclose the documents on request in 1959 as they would do under current legislation. So can he confirm that these historic records are being searched when a subject access request, FOI or similar search request is being received? Now, Mr Vickers, the fact remains that blood and urine tests were taken from many servicemen at nuclear test sites, and the archived documentation suggests that they were indeed formally documented. So what happened to those documents? Where are they now? And why, in so many cases, are nuclear veterans and their families unable to access their personal medical data? This data is vital for their war pension applications and for an understanding of the conditions that they suffer. If I've got one request to the Minister today, it's to give those men and their families the medical information they need while they are still alive. They simply need to know where their test sample data is. And if it isn't available, be open. Explain what happened to it, when it happened, why it happened, and on whose instruction. Because, yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and she's made a fantastic speech today, setting out all the issues. And I would just like to add weight to that question around simple transparency. If the information is there, can they see it? If there's a reason why they're not able to see it, can that be explained? And I really hope that the Minister will accept either of those routes and explain it to you today, to the honourable member today.
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for her intervention and for all the work that she's done over the years to support nuclear testing veterans. They're very appreciative of her efforts. And on the point that she makes about transparency, this is the key to today's debate. All these men are asking for is the truth. They want to know where their test results are, and if they can't access those test results, they just want to know why. They deserve nothing less than the truth for the service that they've provided to this country, and I hope that the Minister will do all he can to honour the requests that they have made.
Yeah.
If they wish to speak during the debate. The question is that this House has considered nuclear test veterans and medical records. Jim Shannon.
It is indeed a pleasure to speak in this debate, and can I first of all congratulate the Honourable Lady for Salford and Eccles for setting the scene so incredibly well, with all the detail, the passion, the understanding, and we're indebted to her for that. It's also a pleasure to see that the Minister in this place, who's been a dear friend probably nearly all my time in this chamber since I come here in 2010. I look very much forward to his response, because I think he understands the issue of the veterans very well. So I think we're all keen perhaps to have that response to the questions that have been asked, and the commitment that we seek. And firstly, I recognise that the critical contributions of veterans and civilian staff to the UK's nuclear deterrent testing programme in the late 50s and 60s. It is great to hear that so many veterans have now received their medals in relation to the service. This debate, of course, isn't about the medals, but at least that's one of the recognitions that we sought over the years and has been agreed. I think he's not here, but the Right Honourable Member for North Durham, I think, has been instrumental and very active in that over the years, and we thank him for his contribution as well. I look much forward to the Shadow Minister's contribution as well, because he well understands the issues of veterans and has been very assiduous in the House, in Westminster Hall, in the Chamber, in relation to these issues. Chairman, some 20,000 British servicemen, many from Northern Ireland included, some of them my constituents, took part in numerous nuclear tests. To this day, none have received any compensation for illnesses they believe were caused by radiation and other side effects from the impacts of the testing. The Honourable Lady for Salford and Eccles set that scene at the beginning, where they were told to put their sunglasses on, they were told to sit down, shirtless, never knowing what was coming. And really, I mean, that horror of what they endured unknowingly until it was over, I think that illustrates very well, Mr. Chairman, the issues for those people. Many have stated that these health issues passed down genetically to their children, and in some cases too, many lost their children at a very young age. I'm a fan of Call the Midwife. I think probably we all are, Mr. Chairman, but one of those stories that was in that Call the Midwife, but when it was on there last year or the beginning of this year, was a story about a veteran who had been subjected to that, and the effect it had upon him and upon his family, and of course, Call the Midwife, upon his baby yet to be born. Sometimes the programmes on TV illustrate very well the stories that are pertinent out there in real life, and I think they portrayed that extremely well, and it gave me a personal index or personal feeling and insight into what was happening as well. Whilst numerous veterans have since attained copies of their medical records, I think what the Honourable Lady is referring to, and what we're all seeking, is an open doors release of all those medical records, of that data. That's important, so that people can ascertain where the problem started, where they came from, and that they can. I mean, many recall having certain tests done which were not recorded on the records that they received. I find that quite hard to comprehend that. I'm not saying it is, but the question we all ask: is there a cover-up? Is there a determined commitment to not releasing that? Now, I understand the Veterans Minister very well. I trust him. I find him an honest and sincere person, so not for one second would I believe that there would be any deliberation to make that happen. The Minister is always diligent in his work and has stated there's been no cover-up of any medical records. If, and I accept that at face value, that there isn't, then I would suggest that what we should be doing, Mr. Chairman, is releasing all of those medical records, all of that information, without them requesting it to each and every one of those veterans and their families. There is, I believe, an obligation on us to look after. We're here to elected representatives on behalf of our constituents, those of Strangford and across Northern Ireland that I'm representing through this debate today. While we should have every faith that this is the truth, there is clearly still a question to be answered as to where this missing information is and who can access to it. I just say, make it clear, release all the records, let the people see what's going on, and then there's no need for any mystery or any stories or thoughts amongst people as to what's happening. Many medical records that remain incomplete hold the vital information needed to claim war pensions to. The Honourable Lady, again from Salford and Nichols, made that clear. This has implications not just for their health today and where they are, but for their pensions as well. And I mean, if somebody has served their country and served them well, then I believe there's a real obligation on us to look after them to the full extent that we should. I know that'll be the Minister's intention. I've absolutely no doubt that that's the reply we'll get. But we need to see some action to the words that we've asked on. Whilst government has remained committed in ensuring that they do all they can to locate records when applied for, there is, I believe, unfortunately, a disparity in the records our veterans are receiving. Again, I urge the government and the Minister in particular to concur that all efforts will be made to locate missing records that hold vital information in relation to health conditions that veterans may be suffering because of nuclear war testing. That's what the Honourable Lady wants. That's what I want. And I believe that's what everybody else here wants. And with that being our request as elected representatives on behalf of our constituents, really, let's get the answers. Thank you.
Emma Llewellyn-Buck.
Thank you, Mr Vickers. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I want to first thank my honourable friend from Salford and Eccles. Not only did she do sterling work in securing and opening this debate, but for her continued campaigning for justice for all of our nuclear veterans. For decades now, our nuclear veterans, their families, campaign groups, journalists and MPs in this place have relentlessly pursued truth and justice for those brave servicemen who bore close witness to the most devastating weapon this country ever produced. These men were part of an experiment, one that secured our safety but devastated them and their families. The Minister will be well aware of the countless testimonies from those willing to speak about the harm radiation exposure has caused to them. Cancer, heart, skeletal, dental and skin problems, difficulties conceiving, depression, personality changes, chronic headaches, mental ill health, all prevalent after being part of these tests. Difficulties conceiving, rare genetic conditions and birth defects passed down through generations. This is the enduring, painful legacy of the tests these men were subjected to and the pain that many of them still feel responsible for. But they are not responsible, the Ministry of Defence is. It is the Ministry of Defence who sent them to these blasts without any understanding of the protection they needed. Men stood in their shorts and vests and were simply asked to turn their back on nuclear blasts. Blasts that we know contaminated the land around them and instantly killed all wildlife there. Yet litigation, petitions, information requests and pleas have all been sidelined by governments, stating that they cannot prove that these men were irradiated, that the evidence and science needed to prove the link between their and their families' unexplained ill health simply doesn't exist. Who on earth, Mr Vickers, would seriously keep up the denial that nuclear blasts do not have a negative impact on the human body? They rightly suspect some kind of cover-up. Susie Boniface at the Daily Mirror, in her long campaign for the truth, has repeatedly uncovered evidence that would indicate such cover-ups. Most recently, evidence that the National Radiological Protection Board reports had been tampered with by officials, as well as past UK government-commissioned research contradicting the conclusions of international scientific research. My constituent and dear friend, Jack Taylor, was involved in Operation Antler near Maralanga. He has files filled full of documents and pictures from his time there, and also, sadly, mountains of dismissive letters from various secretaries of state and ministers. For him, like many of the nuclear veterans, this isn't just about compensation. It's about recognition, it's about truth, and it's about justice. And it breaks my heart that my dear friend and others who did their duty to our country, and as Jack says, a duty that has kept the world safe for decades, should be treated in this despicable way. There is nothing worse than knowing you are telling the truth and those in authority keep telling you that you are wrong. It remains a stain on this country. The common theme through all the decades the veterans and their families have been fighting for justice is an inconsistency from government regarding whether or not the servicemen had blood and urine tests both prior to and after the nuclear tests. And if they did, where were such records kept and how to access them? A recent Freedom of Information request has shown that such records do indeed exist, but as usual, full details will not be released because the AWE says that it is too expensive. That is why these veterans, exhausted but not defeated, are exploring fresh legal action. But they shouldn't have to. These veterans and their families know that full access to their medical records will show that they were exposed to radiation that caused them ill health, and therefore they are due compensation. Yeah, of course.
Here is really one of openness and transparency from the Ministry of Defence. As brave servicemen, including my own constituent Dennis Brooks, served this country and contributed to the safety of this nation over many decades. They deserve answers. Many of these families and those brave servicemen are now pretty advanced in years, and wouldn't it be lovely if before they pass away they receive the answers that not only themselves but their families and their children have waited for so long? Surely the government has an obligation to deliver that for those families.
Emma Llewellyn-Buck.
Thank the honourable member for that intervention, and I couldn't agree more. The anger and frustration that the families feel and those veterans who are still with us today, and the fact that government comes back with answers such as it will cost too much, is an insult to these veterans and their families and everything that they have been through. The UK remains the only nuclear power to deny compensation to its bomb test veterans. Does the Minister seriously think that the US, Canada, France, Fiji and Australia are all wrong to give their nuclear veterans compensation? Why must our nuclear veterans here have to continually fight every single step of the way? We often hear, Mr Vickers, that this government's ambition is for us to be the best place in the world to be a veteran. It's clear, though, that that ambition doesn't extend to our nuclear veterans.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr Vickers. I'd like to start by paying tribute to the Honourable Lady for securing this debate. This place is often at its best when we put aside partisanship and resist the temptation to parrot party political lines, instead helping to shape government and opposition thinking by both understanding and shared experience. And the work she has done, and I've been pleased to work with her, as she knows, on this issue has been illustrative of exactly that spirit. And in that spirit, the Minister will know that on the basis of a cross-party campaign, which I began long ago, actually, when Labour were in government, that's just how long ago it was, we secured, as a result of the intervention of the then Prime Minister, the former member for Uxbridge, a medal for nuclear test veterans. Many were able to receive that before Remembrance Sunday, and this very day a reception is being held for veterans to recognise their contribution. But much, much more needs to be done. It may be said that any age, including our age, will be gauged by how it perceives the inheritance, what it gained from those who came before us, and what it gives to the future, what we bequeath to those who will be born later. And so when we think of what these veterans did and the effect it had on all who came later, including all of us, we can truly value their contribution. We've made progress, as I said, and today the Office of Veterans is holding the reception, recognising the 22,000 nuclear test veterans who risked life and limb long ago in the course of their duties, facing, as has been said already, a radioactive smog and searing nuclear heat which altered their lives forever, changed their DNA. Many are now past, of course. This was a long time ago, before I was born, before most people in this chamber, I guess, were born. And so we're really dealing with a declining number of people, but of course their families were affected too because of the profound character of the effect that it had on them. It's been passed from generation to generation. And that's why this issue of records is so salient. It's not about just the overdue recognition that I've described. It's about understanding our responsibility to those who policy affected in the most dramatic of ways, and dealing with what I have to say, and I hesitate to use this word, but what looks to me like a cover-up. It has to be said. Now, by the way, no party in this House has not been involved in that, because there have been governments come and go since the nuclear tests. And the one thing, one of the few things that's united them wholly is their unwillingness to play straight by nuclear test veterans. Indeed, I mentioned a moment ago, Mr. Vickers, I first went to a Labour Defence Minister to raise the issue of the plight of nuclear test veterans when I was a backbencher back in the late 90s. After that, as you know, Mr. Vickers, I served in government and was able to persuade the then Prime Minister, David Cameron. He's now Lord Cameron, of course. He'd gone from being the Prime Minister to David to Lord Cameron during the period of our campaign, to grant an ex gratia payment to the test veterans, which I know was warmly received. I'd be interested in the Minister's view on whether it's time to refresh that payment. By the way, it was £30 million, and that's quite a while ago. And so perhaps we could have the Minister's views on how he intends to maintain that fund, given the effect on the descendants of the veterans. The publication of records from 70 years ago are being withheld on, in my judgment, highly questionable grounds. And I say that, and I use the term cover-up, not one that I would deploy lightly, because initially the MOD, as the Honourable Lady said, denied there were records at all. And for years we were told that these tests weren't done, or at least if they were done, the records were missing. Then it was revealed there were records, but they weren't to be released. And it's only through freedom of information requests that we have discovered that blood records do indeed exist, held at the atomic weapons establishment. FII requests determined that those blood and urine samples were taken after the first bomb test, and the samples were analysed. We know, too, that these tests were flagged as missing as early as 1959. In more recent years, replies to the MOD have varied from stating there were no information held about blood tests to revealing the existence of hundreds of blood tests to claiming that no one had a blood test was individually identifiable. So there are many questions for this very diligent, very experienced, and very honourable Minister to answer. If there are tests, how many? Where are they held? Was the analysis done? And if so, does it still exist in a way that can be scrutinised? Were the records generic or particular? So were they maintained and named to individuals? Those are all matters which the Minister, I know, will want to make this chamber aware of without delay. And if he can't provide chapter and verse, knowing him, I know that he'll write to members and answer those specific questions. Repeated requests have revealed that many of the files have been closed using the Lord Chancellor's instruction, citing national security exemptions. I'd welcome a clarification from the Minister, including at what point, if any, ministers have ever been made aware that blood tests exist of veterans, which may prove or disprove their claims of having been harmed by radiation. My constituent, Douglas Hearn, died recently. He was the person that 20 years ago first inspired me to take up the case, the cause of nuclear test veterans. He was one such individual sent in boyhood, really, barely a man, out to the South Pacific to journey close to nuclear explosions, to be told to turn his head, wear a hat, wear sunglasses. Can you imagine such a thing, Mr. Vickers? Can you imagine the horror of that and how that lasted with him forever and why he campaigned so vigorously? And so I speak today not only as patron of the British nuclear test veterans, but for Douglas and his families, who I was happy, although very sad, of course, to meet on the occasion of his passing. He lost his wife, Sandy, about a year before. They were dear friends of mine. But it was through Douglas that I learned of this injustice. It's why I took it up more than 20 years ago and why I maintain faith that this government, this minister, will finally make these records available so that we can do right by those that did so much for us.
Thank you, Mr. Vickers. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and like others, I congratulate the member for Salford and Eccles for securing this vital debate. I also congratulate her on her ongoing campaign for the rights of nuclear test veterans. I know that many people all over the country are very grateful for her work. When I was on the Labour Defence team, she introduced me to a group of veterans, their families and campaigners. Their stories were both compelling and moving, and I thank her for that. And I also want to pay tribute to the member for Luton South, who was until recently our Shadow Veterans Minister. And I know I speak on behalf of my honourable friend, the member for Plymouth Devonport, who also served there, to say that she was an excellent Veterans Minister. And I knew all the time that I was on that team that her main focus was on our veterans, and I'd like to thank her personally for her service. In Islam, Mr Vickers, we have a strong history of supporting nuclear test veterans. I'm proud of the fact that up until 2011, the Welsh branch of the Nuclear Test Veterans Association marched through Risca every year from 1993. The standard now proudly stands in St Mary's Church, Risca. It is an event that I was always honoured to attend, even as a much younger MP. I'm pleased to report that when I visited the church last summer, the standard is still there in all its glory. It is hung from the ceiling, a constant reminder of what our nuclear test veterans went through. I'm proud of the fact that Britain has a long, cherished and celebrated history, honouring the valiant efforts of its military personnel, recognising their unwavering commitment and readiness to make the ultimate sacrifice for the safety and security of the nation. As my honourable friend, the member for Salford Eccles, mentioned in her very passionate speech, nuclear test veterans have been recognised for their service, with a medal ran off the production lines in August, ready for the Remembrance Sunday. But there is still a feeling, as so many members who've already spoken mentioned, of unfinished business. The heart of this matter lies in the historical quest for answers by those in service to our nation, participated in or witnessed nuclear testing. This testing took place between 1952 and 1973 in Australia and around the Pacific. Around 40,000 individuals left their families and homes to play a crucial role in ensuring the safety of civilians and military personnel. Without their contribution to the development of our nuclear arsenal, Britain would never be able to carry out Operation Hurricane, the detonation of a plutonium bomb on Montebello Island. This allowed us to become the third nuclear power. The weapons resulted from this test are still protecting us today. Yet, amidst our fight to maintain and hold this arsenal, we have often overlooked those whose lives have been affected by their participation in these tests. Access to medical records is fundamental to the health and well-being of veterans. These records contain critical information that can aid in diagnosing, treating, and managing health conditions arising from exposure to radiation during nuclear tests. It is important to note that many veterans and their families believe that their exposure to these weapons and their radiation has affected not only the health of the veterans themselves, but also the health of their children, and even their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. To shed light on their own health and that of their loved ones, the veterans are asking that their blood and urine tests taken the time while serving their country are released. This is not just an issue for our veterans, but also will play a critical role in helping us understand the effects of radiation poisoning. Some claim that when they've had their medical records back, crucial information has been missing or redacted. When queried, the Ministry of Defence has implied that the test never took place. One veteran has been able to narrow down the date he gave blood to an extremely specific period due to being in medical isolation at that time. If these medical records cannot be found, or if veterans receive incomplete medical records with key information redacted, then we must ask if there were failures by the MOD to properly log and store the veterans' information. This is certainly not an isolated case. Another veteran says the Veterans Group have uncovered over 200 archive documents which clearly show that veterans were required to be tested for blood and urine samples before they went out to the South Pacific to engage in the nuclear testing, whilst they were there and when they came back. So in the words of one veteran, if those tests were done, where are they now? American veterans who were involved in nuclear testing have been able to access their medical records and receive rightful compensation for essential work they completed. These measures included, but are not limited to, a National Day of Recognition for their service and priority healthcare. Our veterans are not even asking for a day of recognition, but instead simply their own medical files. Is it right that British veterans who carried out the same work as their American counterparts have been deprived of the same recognition and support? The lack of medical records has placed our veterans in an impossible situation. They find themselves denied access to their own medical records, crucial documents that hold the key to understanding and addressing potential health issues arising from the exposure to radiation during nuclear tests. This denial leaves them stranded, unable to make informed decisions about the health of their families or access appropriate, fully informed medical care. The recent awarding of medals by the current government is no more than the veterans deserve. However, I cannot feel that without granting these veterans the right to view their own medical records is a superficial act. A military medal is respected around the world, but let us not allow that medal to become hollow by treating those in receipt without the respect they deserve. Access to these medical records is not just a matter of principle. It is their right, essential for their well-being and a testament to our respect for their sacrifices. Mr. Vickers, access to any medical record is a moral issue. The nuclear test veterans have fought a long, hard, and yes, painful campaign. As many now reach their twilight years or have already left us, let us give them the justice they deserve by granting this simple request.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Vickers. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, and it's also an honour to be part of such an important and powerful debate, standing with so many colleagues across the House who are concerned that they see an injustice. Let me start by joining in the tributes to our colleague from Salford, who has been a tremendous advocate for the nuclear test veterans and persistent. And I fear often that its persistence is what is required in this place, no matter how strong and compelling the case that you're making. Let me also pay tribute to our colleague on the opposite bench as well for his support and work on those issues too. He's right, this House is at its best when we join together. The member for Strangford suggested that Call the Midwife was the relevant cultural reference for the debate today. I feel it's more of a horror story and a horror film, because when we actually listen to the stories about what happened to our constituents and what is now happening to their families, it does almost feel like something out of the Hollywood playbook. It simply feels like it could not be true. And yet we know it did happen. And we know it happened to citizens of this country, and we know the effects are still being felt for generations after. Let me start by sharing the experience of my own constituent, Albert Swain, who's known as George, and who is now 91. He lived in Walthamstow on his return from the Pacific for almost 50 years. He's now left, but his daughter is still my constituent. And in 1957, he was serving on the aircraft carrier HMS Warrior during Operation Grapple X. This was a test of the hydrogen bomb, which was more than 140 times more powerful than the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. Albert worked in the galley, But during the test, he was told to come up to the deck to witness the explosion, told to put himself in harm's way. He wasn't given any specialist protective equipment, and despite turning his back on the explosion, he says, and he still remembers, seeing his bones through his hands, through his flesh, when the weapon was detonated. His colleagues on the boat said the same thing. Since his involvement, he has now received his medal. And I think it is right that we thank these people for their service. But our debate today is whether we have truly honoured them for the sacrifice they have made of their health, which is what we are now seeing. Albert's family are concerned about the medical implications of that day for him. He has had skin cancer on his face. He's been blind in one eye now for about 5 years. And he's always had anxiety, the psychological problems, the mental health issues that were mentioned earlier. More worrying, his children have had medical issues they are desperately concerned are related. One daughter had 2 miscarriages. Another lost a baby 2 days postpartum. All of his granddaughters have gynecological problems of some sort. And one grandson has scoliosis. We know that exposure to ionising radiation can lead to heritable mutations, meaning the family will never be sure unless somebody investigates whether what is happening to them is because of what happened to George. Let's think for a moment of 40,000 families in this country thinking the same thing, and then ask ourselves whether what we're having to ask today is really enough. I know the Minister has heard the claims, the calls for the evidence to be released, for the blood and urine tests. I think it says something about us, does it not, that we are now dealing with quite an elderly generation. As my colleague opposite has said, some have now passed away. And yet, rather than tearing down the barriers to the challenges that they may face, they still exist. Surely, in this day and age, knowing what we know now about what's happened to these people, at the very least, we shouldn't be waiting for people to make requests for their own medical information. There shouldn't be a question about whether data can be released or whether a freedom of information request is sufficient. We should be humbled and horrified enough to get that information to them and to proactively be investigating the healthcare concerns that they may have and that their families may have. Surely that is the very least that we can do, is to recognise the problems that are happening, the stories that are being told across the country of the people affected by what happened to their grandparents. And yet still today they're struggling to get information. It surely is a mark of shame to us. I know the Minister will share the concern that veterans are having to consider legal action to get their medical records and to get the compensation and the answers that they deserve. When an issue unites the House like this, when there is nobody here to defend the status quo, and the member opposite is right, governments of all colours have played their part in this tragedy, surely now is the time to stand up and be what these people were, the best of our country, the best of our people, and do the best of service for them. So I hope the Minister will do more today than just ask whether or not the data is available, or even if people are making compensation requests. We have to offer those families the help and support they need if they are facing the experiences of this. We have to offer the proactive approach I think everybody here agrees needs to happen. I know the Minister will want to do this. So my question to the Minister is, what does he need from us to make that happen? Because he will have heard the stories. He will think of somebody like George standing on that deck on a bright day, seeing his bones through his skin, not even realising that generations later it could affect his grandson in the way that we might fear it has. He will want to do right by George and all the others. So what does the Minister need from us to make sure that not just those records are released and the compensation is given, but we have the inquiry that we need to get to the bottom of what happened to those people and what we can do to put it right?
Thank you, Mr Vickers. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. I want to congratulate my old friend from Salford Eccles for the way she introduced this debate, but also for the way that she has been persistent, calm and very clear about what justice looks like, about what the veterans of those British nuclear tests deserve, and about what can be done about it. This isn't just one debate that she has done so. This has been over very many years. And I think she speaks for many in this House on both sides, where she makes the very simple, plain case for justice, for transparency. for an understanding which those people involved with the tests are currently being denied. And I want to thank her for that effort. I also want to echo the thanks to Fleet Street Fox, to Susie Boniface in the Mirror, for her persistent and dogged campaigning on this. If it weren't for her arguing for the column inches, for the articles, for the time to investigate over many, many years, I think this issue would not be as loud or as prominent as it is today. And many people owe it to her journalism for the justice that I hope they will get in the future. Happy giving away.
I described my constituent Douglas Hearn as having inspired me, but had that Mirror journalist not cajoled me and informed me over so long, I don't think I would have maintained this campaign with quite the vigour I have. So he's entirely right to pay tribute to her.
Thank the honourable gentleman for his interventions. I'd also like to echo the thanks to my colleague from Luton South for her time on in the shadow defence team, and welcome my new friend for Birmingham Selly-Oak, who is taking over that role shortly. I am merely a stand-in part for today, but I would like to add my thoughts and my experience in Plymouth to those that have been shared here today. Our nuclear test veterans served our country with pride and distinction. They made a vital contribution to the creation of Britain's independent nuclear deterrent that continues to keep ourselves and our NATO allies safe today. It is a contribution that our nation should be proud of, and it's a contribution that our country owes a huge debt of gratitude and honour for. But that's not an abstract honour. When those words are used, it's somehow like a fog that descends on honour, but I don't think it is. I think that debt of honour is a promise for action. Just as our Armed Forces Covenant says that no one who served should suffer disadvantage because of their service, I think it is clear that for this group of veterans, they are suffering disadvantage because of their service. And we, those people who have argued for the Armed Forces Covenant, who have argued for a sense of decency and respect for those who have served and serve today, should honour it with action. Defence ministers should be working, I believe, to ensure as much as possible there's transparency and respect shown for those nuclear test veterans and the lasting consequences that their families have suffered. I think my colleague from Walthamstow put it very clearly when she talks not only of the veterans, but the children of those test veterans and the grandchildren of those test veterans. This isn't a cohort that deserves justice before they die, although they do. This is a cohort whose experiences in the Pacific will last generations to come if we don't provide that clarity and that understanding. My old friend for Isloin described it as unfinished business, and he is right. But it is business that this minister and this House can do something about. As already has been referenced in this debate, the reports of nuclear test veterans are considering the prospect of suing the government to access their medical records if they're not forthcoming. But it shouldn't take legal action to access the truth. Indeed, the words that some ministers have used around this legal action suggest that it is the only way of getting the truth, because there is nothing that ministers can do in the meantime, or nothing that they want to do in the meantime. That doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't sit well with members in this House. That means that for this group of veterans, they must be prepared to pay for lawyers to get at that truth. What does that say about our democracy? That is the only way for them to access the justice that they deserve. I think there are reasonable questions that have been asked in this debate to the Minister on this. I'd like to echo a few of them that have been said so far. I'd like to understand what discussions he and his colleagues have had with the nuclear test veterans and affiliated veterans groups about access to the requested medical records. Because this isn't just about parliamentarians on both sides of the House asking those questions. There are groups of determined individuals out there making that case consistently, calmly and coolly. When was the last time the Minister met with that group, and when is he planning to meet them next? If those medical records are being withheld, is there a good reason for doing so? It was alluded to by my colleague from South Shields that it's around cost. If it is around cost, then it's about money. And all of us in this House understand that money is about where we put our political priorities. It is clear that there is a political priority and an interest from members on both sides of this House that this is resolved. So if it is about cost, is there a way that the Minister can help to unblock that? What support is in place for those war pension applications, for those nuclear test veterans who haven't received their full service medical records so far? And how does the awarding of a medal, that medallic recognition, tie in with their campaign? Does the Minister regard that medal as a full stop at the end of this campaign? Or does he regard that as a platform that shows how as a nation we recognise the service and now we must do more to resolve the final issues with that group? Mr Vickers, Labour is proud to give our full support to nuclear test veterans campaigns for their medallic recognition, something that was important support on both sides of the House. And as a party, we're proud that the Leader of the Opposition was the first political leader to meet the nuclear test veterans back in 2021 as part of that campaign. But it should not have taken decades for a medal to have been awarded to the 22,000 veterans who served during Britain's nuclear tests. Everyone who served, those alive and those who have passed, deserve recognition for the service during the tests. But it's not just about receiving the medal, it's how those medals are being received as well. At present, many of those nuclear test veterans are receiving those medals in plain packaging, arriving second class post through their doors. I think they deserve better than a second class post. They deserve better than a medal arriving in the post. They deserve a proper ceremony. Now, I helped Mr. Tony Carpanini, an 88-year-old constituent of mine, receive his medal after he struggled to get it from the Ministry of Defence. He said, "If I had received this medal 60 years ago, it would have meant a lot more, but it's much better late than never." Mr. Carpanini's right about his medal, but there's so many people he served alongside with who won't be able to get that medal because they're no longer with us. And we must learn from that experience of medals with the experience of the justice that many people are seeking in this debate. That strong sense of injustice that Mr. Carpanini left me with is something that we've heard from interventions on both sides of the House, from people standing up for their constituents. The member for Vale of Clwyd opposite, who spoke about his constituents, member for Blackpool South, who's no longer in his place, spoke about his, and member for Tiverton and Honiton spoke about a member there. This is something that affects all our constituencies. And if we divide up 22,000 veterans across 650 members of Parliament, there's enough in every single constituency to make every single MP do something about this. I think the member for Strangford put it very well when he's asking for the doors to be opened and that relationship with data to be published. Make it clear, release the records, is, I think, how he put it. And I think that is a strong ask that I'd encourage the Minister to have a look at. But can I just return just briefly to those medal ceremonies that I think have been so missing? I'd like the Minister to join me in congratulating Councillor Alan Dowson from Peterborough, who I met with on a visit to Peterborough with Andrew Pakes, and to Fred Thomas in Plymouth and Catherine Atkinson in Derby, who have been organising medal ceremonies in their communities. Because the government didn't provide a medal ceremony for nuclear test veterans, notwithstanding a knees up over in the Office of Veterans Affairs taking place today, there should be a ceremony for every veteran to receive their medal after so long being denied it. What Fred, Catherine and Alan are organising is a ceremony in their own communities, asking the Mayor or Lord Mayor of their local council to present that medal to that service, that veteran, to say thank you for their service, not just on behalf of a grateful nation, but on behalf of a grateful community. I think the Minister could do something really quite special with that, even if he says no to many of the requests that we've heard today, and encourage every local authority to hold a medal ceremony to award those medals to nuclear test veterans in their community. Councils don't know how many nuclear test veterans there are in their community. I don't know how many are in mine in Plymouth, but I know that they're everywhere. That's what the census showed us, that there are veterans in every single one of our communities. And the best thing about this, that will don't get me in trouble either with the Shadow Chancellor nor perhaps the Minister with the Chancellor himself, is this won't cost the Ministry of Defence a penny. This is something that we can encourage our friends in local authorities to do, who want to do it to recognise the service of those people in their communities. Very briefly, yeah.
Descendants too. because I hope that the medals can be awarded posthumously to descendants, like the descendants of my constituent Douglas Home. And I will get that medal for his descendants, so the Minister better agree it now, or we'll have to have a disagreement.
Pollard.
I'm grateful for that intervention, and the honourable gentleman's right. It should be about those people who are descendants of those nuclear test veterans. And I believe in the terms and conditions of the applications, it does make provision for those people who are no longer with us to have that medal awarded posthumously. But that in itself, I think, provides a set of principles that we should equally apply to their service elsewhere. And that is something that in this debate we've heard from members across the House about just asking questions. I think these are fair questions that we have heard today. Fair questions on behalf of constituents who just want to understand the truth about what happened to their blood and urine tests, what happened to the truth, why the truth from the Ministry of Defence in terms of their statements has changed so often over time. Could the Minister give us, if not the answers to those questions today, could he set out a path, a journey that he and his department can go on that will provide comfort and confidence to the families and to members on both sides that the Ministry of Defence takes this seriously, that there is a sense that perhaps, if not all answers that can be offered, that a general sense of direction, a general sense of clarity and understanding can be achieved. Because I conclude at the start of what I said here, I'm proud that my party stands with these nuclear test veterans, but I'm also proud that actually in this House, both sides stand with our nuclear test veterans. They served our country with pride and distinction, and we owe it to them to be transparent about the risks they faced and the lasting consequences that their families have suffered. I think the Minister could do more on this, and I hope that when he stands up in a moment, he'll be able to give a sense of peace of mind and justice to those who are affected by our nuclear testing programme. Thank you.
Minister.
Mr Vickers, thank you very much indeed. And can I start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Salford and Eccles for bringing this debate and for her tireless championing of the cause of nuclear test veterans. We all have got nuclear test veterans in our constituency. Many of us served with them during the initial parts of our service life, and some of us have got nuclear test veterans in our own families. We'll certainly never forget the tens of thousands of service personnel, scientists and civilians from the UK and her allies who participated in the British nuclear testing programme between 1952 and 1967. The test programme over 15 years represented the largest tri-service event since the D-Day landings. By equipping the UK with an appropriate nuclear capacity, they helped keep the Cold War in the fridge, preventing a third potentially devastating conventional war. And with the threat from nuclear armed states escalating, their contribution continues to keep us safe today. Mr Vickers, I think we've had some powerful contributions from backbench colleagues today, in addition to the contribution from the Honourable Gentleman who speaks for the opposition. We've heard from the Honourable Member for Strangford, the Honourable Lady for South Shields, my right Honourable friend, the Member for South Holland and the Deepings, the Member for Islwyn, and the Honourable Lady who represents Walthamstow. And I will try, in the time available to me, to answer the points that they have raised, but if I'm unable to do so, I'll certainly write to them. When it comes to health effects, we should remember at all times that the UK atmospheric nuclear test programme experimented on weapons. They did not experiment on service personnel. Tests were carried out to contemporary radiological standards, documenting safety measures and monitoring that took place at the time. Over the past 6 decades, there have been 4 big, independently conducted and analysed longitudinal cohort studies of the population at risk. Their results have consistently demonstrated that cancer and mortality rates for the nuclear test veterans are similar to those for serving contemporaneously in the armed forces who did not participate in the testing programmes. And it's important to emphasise that these are big epidemiological studies. The results show that their cancer and mortality rates are in fact lower than for the general population. Now, I'm not particularly going to pray that in aid, since we would expect that to be the case, given what's called the healthy worker effect. but I think it should give some reassurance to those who served. In corroboration, last year, a study into mortality among US military participants at 8 above-ground nuclear test series events between 1945 to 1962 was published. The study population was 114,270 individuals over 65 years. No health effect from participation in the tests was evidenced. In July last year, Brunel University published its results into the number of chromosomal abnormalities in nuclear test veterans and their children compared with a control veteran group. They found no significant differences. Now, I think these studies are important, as perfectly understandably, veterans may ascribe illness or abnormality to dramatic past experiences, like witnessing a nuclear mushroom cloud. But the highly compelling evidence we have both from this country and from abroad strongly suggests that they should be reassured in respect of their participation in nuclear tests between 1952 and 1967. Based on the peer review evidence, I furthermore think that we should all be responsible and measured in the language we use, even as we rightly advocate for our constituents and call for transparency, on which more anon. Now, turning to individual service records, of course I will, yes.
Just on the point he made about the United States tests, just in July this year, President Biden said, and I quote, "I have signed laws that support veterans who developed cancer and other medical conditions stemming from our World War II nuclear programme." So what signs is he relying on that we're not relying on?
I'm relying on the evidence published last year. That's to say 114,000+ veterans who have been followed up over 65 years. Now, I can't account for the President of the United States. What I can do is rely rigorously on the scientific peer review evidence. Now, we've heard today a number of harrowing accounts from constituents, and I have my own. But at the end of the day, she will appreciate that policy has to be based upon a rigorous examination of the evidence, and I believe that is what has been done in this case, in this country, and I suspect has been done by predecessor governments of all political persuasion. That is the only basis on which we can proceed. And what I would say to the Honourable Lady, who spoke in very powerful terms, if I may say so, is we need to be careful about unduly alarming people who have served the country in the way we have been describing. That is not in any way to say they should be downplayed, or indeed that we shouldn't be transparent in the evidence that we produce. And I'll come on in my remarks to cover some of that, if I may. I have to say that the narrative that someone is hiding files, presumably under consecutive governments, is curious. To answer the Honourable Lady, I am not aware that medical records or test results have been withheld for national security reasons. However, I have asked again and had it confirmed that the Atomic Weapons Establishment does not hold medical records for any former service personnel. It does, however, hold historic, technical and scientific documentation about the UK's nuclear testing programme in their archives, and this has been published as recently as September through a Freedom of Information request, and that has been referred to already in the debate today. In response to the request for any documents containing the words blood or urine, the AWE returned a report containing the subject headings of 150 items. These were reviewed, and it was found that 3 particular documents referencing blood or urine tests were of interest. One referred to an anonymous blood test, another
another contained 4 anonymous urine tests, and the last identified one individual's blood tests. Following a request, that information was provided to the individual's next of kin. Now, I have looked at the subject headings and asked officials to look again at the 150 files with a view to making those not already available to the public to be made public, to be placed in the public domain. I have also asked to see them myself. I hope that helps the honourable gentleman who speaks for the opposition, and I share the desire of this House to make transparent that which can be made transparent. And I hope it will put the matter beyond any possible doubt. But as my right honourable friend, the Minister for Veterans Affairs, categorically said recently, there is no cover-up to answer the honourable member for Strangford directly. Indeed, I cannot see why there would be. No personal health records are withheld from living veterans. Any medical records taken either before, during or after participation in the UK nuclear weapon tests that are held in individual military medical records in the government archives can be accessed on request by submitting a data subject access request. Can I say, though, that some of any records that were made would be up to 71 years old? They would be paper, poorer and perishable. Not at all the auditable, searchable electronic medical and technical records that we are used to today. Absent or incomplete records should not be taken as evidence of some sort of conspiracy. What we do know, however, is that when in the early 2000s a group of nuclear test veterans initiated a claim against the then government denied exposure took place and said there were no health consequences as a result of being present at nuclear test sites. Now, I cannot answer for the then government, but evidence since strongly supports the claim that there have been no health consequences. Yes, I will.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I thank him for drawing our attention to the Brunel study that he's talking about. Of course, having read it, he will understand that there is an element of that report that does say there is a concern about the DNA building block SBS16 and that there was a mutation, particularly in the nuclear veteran families. I appreciate the bulk of the report said that there was no evidence of a substantial difference in genetic material between the test control group and but there is evidence there is something. And it also highlighted that a disproportionate number of birth defects in the families of the nuclear test veterans, but that it couldn't be explained by the genetic testing. That does rather suggest that before we completely close the door to the idea that there has been a health impact, as the Minister is perhaps suggesting that we should, we possibly need to explore those angles. After all, the researchers themselves say they can't rule out with any confidence that that's a random variation, can they?
Minister. It's very difficult to prove a negative, but the overall conclusions of the researchers from Brunel University are very clear, but in the interest of transparency, it's worthwhile pointing out it was a fairly small study and also the first part of a series of reports that we anticipate from Brunel University, so we will have to see what transpires. But the headline response from Brunel University, published in July last year, I think should be reassuring for those who believe that their exposure between 1952 and 1967 caused generational problems to their families. Can I turn to the subject of compensation, which has been raised, albeit fairly briefly, today? With respect to this matter, the Department published its policy on ionising radiation back in 2017. The statement was validated by the independent medical expert group IMEG, which provides evidence-based medical and scientific advice to the MOD, ensuring our decisions reflect both contemporary medical understanding on causation and the progress of disorders. In their 6th report, published in September 2022, IMEG again reviewed the evidence, including the findings of the 4th report of the longitudinal study. It concluded no changes to the department's policy statement were required on the basis of the evidence available. However, nuclear test veterans who believe they have suffered ill health due to service still have the right to apply for no-fault compensation under the War Pension Scheme. This scheme applies to anyone who served before the 6th of April 2005. War pensions are payable in respect of illness or injury as a result of military service, with the benefit of reasonable doubt always given to the claimant. Decisions are medically certified and take account of available service and medical evidence. They also carry full rights of appeal to an independent tribunal. Additionally, there are a range of supplementary pensions and allowances payable, including for dependents. Each case will be considered on its own merits. Now, there have been some specific concerns raised about the handling of individual medical data, but I can confirm that there is a formal complaints procedure under the 2018 Data Protection Act. In respect of requests made for medical data under the Freedom of Information legislation by living relatives and relatives of deceased veterans, I hope honourable members will appreciate that I am unable to comment due to ongoing legislation. Of course, I give way to my right honourable friend.
So we now know that tests were done, presumably because there was a view that there might be an effect of the exposure to radiation, else there wouldn't have been blood and urine tests. We know that inquiries by veterans about that were, as he put it, curiously not answered on earlier occasions. So the question remains, why? And who? And when? Which ministers who will still be in this House or possibly in the upper house refuse to provide that information? On what basis? And when? That can be provided by government now, presumably, with a degree of notice.
Minister.
For that, there's a list of 150 pieces of data, files of data, that the Atomic Weapons Establishment has said in September it holds that contain reference to blood and reference to urine. I've got a list of it here. It's in the public domain. Perfectly happy to give him it. What I'm not clear about, reading through this, is what the bulk of those files actually say. What's in those files? All I have are the subject headings. Some of them are pretty anodyne, to be honest. They're proceedings of various symposia, which presumably are available elsewhere. But some of it is tantalising in terms of reference to test results. I would like to see what those documents look like. I have not seen them so far, and I certainly intend to examine them myself. But more than that, I think it's reasonable for officials to trawl through these again to be absolutely clear why that which is not currently in the public domain, which I suspect is quite a lot of this, are not in the public domain, and why they should not be. So there has to be very good reason why this is not. Now, clearly, these tests happened overseas, and there may be very good reason why this material was not placed in the public domain. But this is now up to 71 years old. So it does seem to me, given the level of public interest, that it is reasonable at least to ask a question as to why these documents, so tantalisingly put before us through the Freedom of Information Act of September this year, are not in the public domain in their entirety. And I will undertake to find out why that is. And wherever I can possibly do so, I will ensure that that material is placed in the public domain with the usual caveats. So, for example, if there's personal information in them, which I do not expect from what I've been told, then clearly there are some restrictions on the publication of that. But if it's simply sheets and sheets and sheets of dosimetry and urine and blood test results, then I can't see why that shouldn't be available. And I will certainly make it my business to examine that in the days ahead, if that's of any help to my right honourable friend. The government is committed, in summary, just to do everything we reasonably can to support our nuclear veterans, as indeed we're committed to all of our veterans. And that includes acknowledging the profound contribution that they have made through medallic recognition. And I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for majoring on that. He knows very well that last November the Prime Minister announced that all nuclear test veterans will be eligible for a commemorative medal. And to date, some 1,600 veterans have received the medal, whose design features an atom surrounded by olive branches. And I'm delighted today, as he referenced, that there will be a reception which I'll attend at Admiralty House, co-hosted by Secretary of State and Minister for Veterans Affairs, to witness a further 50 nuclear test veterans receiving their honour. He asked why they're not presented formally. I understand where he's coming from and note that Lord Lieutenants, for example, sometimes undertake medal presentation ceremonies. I think in this case, there was an imperative to get the medals out the door so that the veterans could have them by Remembrance Sunday. And we've achieved quite a lot of that. And I think that was the wish as far as we could make it out for the bulk of the veteran community. But in general, I would support his contention that it adds to the expression of gratitude that a medal, a commemorative medal, represents if they can be presented personally. It won't be the wish of every veteran, of course it won't, but for many it will be, and I would support in general the point that he made. But our appreciation of the contribution of nuclear test veterans really doesn't stop there. Indeed, the Honourable Gentleman rightly said so. We are also investing in projects to further our understanding of the experiences of all who were deployed between 1952 and 1967. This will include funding for academics to record the life stories of veterans across the UK. And I hope that colleagues will join me in encouraging all members of this unique community who reside in their constituencies to come forward and share their front row experience of one of the defining operations of our time.
Bailey to wind up.
Thank you, Mr Vickers. I'd like to thank everybody for their contributions in today's debate. I think it's been a very good debate. It's been a very collegiate debate. And on that matter, I'd like to extend special thanks, really, to the Right Honourable Member for South Holland and the Deepings. It's very rare that you can make very good friends on the opposite benches. And myself and himself have been very friendly and active on the issue of nuclear testing veterans. Following up on the long-running work that he's done over the years as a champion for nuclear testing veterans. Now, what the Right Honourable Member also said is that whilst we may have been united in our campaigning activities, the government of the decades have not been united, only united in their failure to recognise what testing veterans suffered. Various colleagues made references to compensation and support that was provided to other countries, nuclear testing veterans, such as America, for example, where nuclear testing veterans have received a day of recognition, they've had medical care, and they've received compensation and access to their full medical and testing records. The Honourable Member for Walthamstow talked about the need for an inquiry, not only for testing veterans themselves, but also their descendants. And I'd like to make the point that in the UK, we have never had a detailed health study or research project into the effect of radiation conducted at these tests on nuclear testing veterans and their descendants. The Minister made reference to a number of papers that were produced, but they weren't provided with the full suite of information required to determine the outcome that was needed. Indeed, international studies have come to different conclusions. They found that levels of radiation to nuclear testing veterans was in excess, and it did affect their overall health implications over time. So I note the comments that he's made, and I've no doubt that his intentions in this debate are very, very honourable. But there are some confusing comments that he made. So, for example, he stated that the AWE does not hold any medical records, and that's his firm belief. But then he went on to respond to the question about the 150 documents that were referenced in the FOI and said that test information was in there and it was provided to the next of kin. Now, that suggests to me that the AWE did hold test information in relation to particular individuals, and as a result of the FOI, it had to issue those test results to the next of kin of that particular veteran. Would the Minister like to respond on that point?
She's right. There is one out of the 150, which I understand references an individual by name. Now, I don't know why that is. It could have been a mistake. I just simply don't know. That's why I have asked to see those 150 files myself, and in particular, the 3 that were pulled out of the 150 as being particularly germane to this particular debate. So I should be interested to see what the reason is. I apologise to the Honourable Lady. In the time available to me, the AWE has not been able to tell me specifically why there should have been that one case out of all the data that they hold that is personally identifiable.
Thank you. I
Becca
appreciate
Long-Bailey.
the Minister's honesty in responding to that, but he can understand the levels of frustration that have been in this debate today and, of course, out in the wider country on this issue, because every response that we receive is different. One suggests that there are medical records, the other suggests that there aren't, and we just want to know the truth. I understand that he's undertook to review the 150 FOI documents, and that's very much appreciated, and perhaps he can report back to the House on his findings, but there are numerous other documents that we know exist. So, for example, the AB and the ES files that have been withdrawn from the National Archives, if he could commit to putting those in the public domain, again, that would be grateful. And in relation to other documents that may or may not be available, he referenced the fact that, of course, these documents are very old, and veterans have been campaigning for access to their records for over 70 years. He said that many of the documents will be in paper form and that there might not be an auditable trail. I find that very hard to believe. We're one of the greatest military services in the world, that there would not be a recorded system to access particular documents. If he could look into this as a matter of urgency and perhaps conduct an inquiry into the location of those historic documents so that he can report back to the House. And as I said in my opening remarks, if they don't exist, and he knows they don't exist, it's up to the government now to be open and honest and explain what happened to the documents, on whose instruction they were destroyed, and why.
The question is that this House has considered nuclear test veterans and medical records. As many of that opinion say aye, to the contrary no, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The sitting is suspended until 11 o'clock. Order, order.